Alright, so we're back here with the fusion tail lights, and you are seeing condensation. That's because these lights were filled with water, and no, they weren't modified before then. They were actually stock. Must have been a manufacturing defect. I think the water is actually getting in through this screw here. Kind of see it's all rusty. These are actually aftermarket Mondeo style lights. You can get them from China. Alright, so let's start taking the stuff apart, see what we can do here. See what we can learn. Alright, so first thing, let's take the lens off. And let's put that in a safe place. I like to put them in these containers. Now, there's some damage in here, but that's probably okay because you're either not going to see it, and or we're going to repaint some of this chrome anyway. But here is basically the internal. So, something's holding this in, and I'm going to assume that they are screws. So you always want to start with taking out all the possible screws. Sometimes they're hiding pretty good, but I think that's the last one I missed. Now, how do you keep track of the screws? Well, what I do is I have these little containers. When you're working on multiple lights at the same time, it's very easy to start misplacing screws, and that gets annoying. Alright, so let's see what we got here. Bezel now comes out. Nice spots of water on it still, water droplets. Let me turn the exposure down on this. I feel like it's getting blown out. See if that's better. Alright, so the bezel, right, pretty much consists of a whole bunch of reflector bowls. That's where the LEDs are going to shine off the board and into these reflector bowls to illuminate, or give a better illumination anyway, inside this housing. So we're going to take this and also put it in the tub so it doesn't get scratched or lost or broken or whatever. And yeah, you can see, look at this little screw hole where that screw went in. See how rusty that is? I'm pretty sure that's where the water was kind of getting in and sitting. So why don't we first kind of see how this light works, right? Kind of see what function does what. So let's hook up some voltage to it and see what we got going on. So it looks like we have 5 plugs on the back. Alright, so I'll assume black is ground. Then again, should never assume anything. Alright, we got something there. So, power to this yellow wire. Looks like it's giving us our turn signal. And the turn signal is only made up of these 9 LEDs here on top of this board. See how that kind of illuminates up in that reflector piece? It's really made for the other reflector piece, but it's still traveling up there. Alright, so that is our turn signal. Interesting, so 12 volts to, what's this bottom wire? The other orangish wire lights up the same thing. So that probably has something to do with programming on the car. Maybe CAN bus controlled stuff, depending on what signal's being sent. Next one here. So that would be your parking lights. That's going to illuminate the outside ring. See this LED here? Probably can't see it, but the water probably killed it. Both of them. This one's completely out. This one's barely glowing. This one's out. So the water did end up killing a bunch of these. Depending on how they're wired, I'm going to guess in series, but we can figure that out later, whether, you know, what's wired in parallel here, what's in series, what voltage is actually required to drive these like this, how it's being driven, etc. We'll try to figure that out. Alright, and then the last wire should be our brake, right? Yeah, so there's our brake, which is the LEDs on the bottom of that main board, opposite from the turn signal. Alright, so we found every function so far. So now, why don't we start kind of taking this stuff apart. So we can see what's going on. Obviously, it's not worth trying to isolate and utilize these OEM LEDs on the board, which would have been nice because they're probably high quality LEDs from, well, if this is an aftermarket tail light, they may or may not be, but I'm sure the OEM tails are high quality LEDs from Osram or something. Not that you can't get good LEDs from China, might be inconsistent, but if you're buying them in batches off AliExpress, they probably are not the greatest, but it doesn't mean they're bad. You just might have some consistency issues. Alright, so looks like all these are kind of one piece and they're all wired together. And it gets its main power from this little connector down here, which has 3 pins on it. It looks like, yeah. Interesting stuff. Looks like you're actually going from 3 pins and then eventually drop down to only 2. So that's interesting. Then we have the main board here. This is just kind of clipped in with its main connector here. So that's coming from the main headlight harness plug we just were playing with. Look how bad this board is from that water. The exposure is still washed out. Alright, see if I can fix this again. There, now you can definitely see the board. See all that water damage. Surprised the taillight was still working this long. I'll show you another picture of this, or a video of this, since the exposure was all blown out last time. Alright, can't get this board out. It's really in there. But it looks like what's going to the smaller board here, which we have to determine what exactly is happening on it when we kind of try to look at it, is the blue and black wire. I don't remember. I think blue was the parking light ring, right? So that's probably feeding in here. That would make sense. And then that's feeding out around the parking light series of LEDs. Alright, so I got that out. Another connector there. So we want to see what this board looks like. I'm guessing, so we got a bunch of resistors, right? I'll assume these are transistors of some sort, maybe. I don't know. I'll have to Google these and kind of try to understand what they're doing. Maybe all this does is drop down, you know. Well, let's see. Let's see if we can figure out. See what it does. We know that it was feeding the ground and the blue wire here, which again I think was the parking lights. It had to be, because that's what was lighting this ring up, which we know is parking lights. So why don't we put some power to this? So this was like this, right? So ground's on the right, power's in the middle. Ground's on the far side, power's on the middle. Okay. Then what we can do is check the output of this, although it's going to be kind of hard. So here's what we'll do. Let's solder some wires. By the way, I highly recommend this soldering iron. I think it's called like a TS100 or something like that. But you can flash custom firmware on it and unlock basically some pretty cool modes. Alright, so I basically hooked up 12.9 volts to this board, kind of what the car would be doing, and then confirm that 12.91 volts. And on the output side, we're at 12.25, so we have some voltage drop. Alright, so I think what I'll do is maybe the next video we'll dive into these three actual boards and try to understand what they run on, how they're doing it, constant current driving, stepping down, stepping up, what's going on. Hope you learned something.